Thank you for joining us today on this episode of MSP 1337, a podcast dedicated to helping MSPs and their clients navigate cybersecurity. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, VCIO Toolbox. If you're looking to strengthen your client relationships, improve retention, and shorten long sales cycles, check out VCIO Toolbox, the strategic account management platform that helps MSPs get closer to their clients. To find out more, head over to vciotoolbox.com. Now on with the show. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined by Jim Lippie of SaaS Alerts. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, so it's been a long time. We go back to your days as an MSP. And so today's episode, I really wanted to capture the essence of what MSPs represent sort of yesterday and today, because I don't think the MSP as a whole has changed dramatically as far as what our intentions are when we help our clients. Right. But I think the approach or the angle in which we were really good at providing services to our clients, that warm fuzzy, is changing with or without us. And so we were just talking about this. Infrastructure was the primary focus of really any IT company, right? Whether you were break, fix, VAR, vendor, et cetera, it was all about how do we secure, manage, support an infrastructure environment, whether it's on-prem with the client or in some other data center. So if I think about that, I think, wow, the evolution of the space has dramatically changed over the last 2-3 years even. So as you and I have been talking, and you go back to the days of when you were an MSP, fast forward through some of your days with Kaseya and now with what you're doing at SaaS Alerts, what do you see as sort of the fundamental shift that MSPs need to be embracing that they're struggling to wrap their heads around?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and we talk about it all the time. So let's go back in the time machine. All right, so 2005, I was a CEO at Thrive Networks in Boston, and I can't even tell you from 2005 to 2012 how many times I said this to a question. The question from the prospect or the customer is, what do you do around our applications? And the pat answer was, we don't support your applications. We support the infrastructure those applications live on.
Right.
And that brings me now to today, right? So we were always, one of the things we always said and did and fully intended to do was be focused on delivering a result for the customer.
Sure.
Right? Like, you have workers that need to be productive. We want to make sure that those workers have access to the applications and can go to work every single day and be productive and get stuff done.
And if we went above and beyond, we enabled efficiency, we lowered overhead, some other things that may go with that, and the client's like, oh, awesome, and we're printing less, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So now fast forward to today, we talk about the evolution of the market or the transformation. And I really think actually COVID has expedited this transformation even more. I mean, it's been underway, but now I think MSPs, need to really focus more on user behavior, right? Because now we've gone from the traditional MSP model of supporting small businesses that have on-premise applications,
right,
that have been predominantly accessed by company-owned devices on company-managed networks.
Right.
Now, more and more, it's employees accessing SaaS applications on personal devices from open networks. Okay?
Sure.
That's a big security problem.
Well, and let's add a piece to that equation, because you're essentially describing, we'll call it BYOD, because that's been around for a while.
Yeah.
What hasn't been maybe popular, or maybe we'll say we've shoved it under the rug, is the BYOA, the bring your own apps. Like, if as the enterprise or business, you're supposed to use this app, and you're like, this is so inefficient, I want Dropbox versus Google Drive. And it's like, oh my word, this is like an explosion. And like, how do you even manage that?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously there's a term created for it, shadow IT.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of issues in there. I mean, we could take hours just dissecting all of that. But so now we feel like if we're going to deliver a great result for the customer, we have to take accountability for protecting the user. You know, when I was at Kaseya, I would go around the country. I would do 40 or 50 shows a year in person, and I would do security talks with folks. And one question I would ask the audience every single time is, what is the biggest security risk in the customer environments that you manage? And every single time,
People.
we would have 4 or 5 people raise their hands, the brave people, right,
Right.
in the front row. And every single time the answer was the end user.
Right.
Bingo, absolutely right. That is the biggest risk. Not because they're bad people. They want to get their jobs done as efficiently as possible, and they take shortcuts to do it.
Yeah.
So, with that, if we're going to again deliver a great result for our customers, we need to take accountability for the end user
Right.
and what they do and the user behavior. And ultimately, I think that's really, encapsulates the transformation or the evolution that we've been talking about.
Right. And to some degree, so I spend a lot of time in the education space now. As I was telling you, I'm the tech director for a school district. And one of the things that gets said to me all the time is it's the SAMR model: substitution, augmentation, modification, and replacement. And you're like, okay, so if I think about student engagement and what we're trying to do for the students to be engaged, substitution and augmentation, that's like the lowest of the low. You're really not, and not that it's bad, but it's not really changing much for the student. However, as I've been there now a couple of years, one of the realizations that I have is substitution and augmentation at a teacher level can be transformational for their work experience, because what used to be copies on the copier and managing how to get stuff ready for a class is now like, here, Johnny, here's your iPad. We're going to be on lesson 3, right? Like, so same idea, just not using a textbook, right? I think that is what's happening right now in the space at large. To your point, is shadow IT and these other things, they're looking for ways to get their jobs done faster and more efficiently. And with things like COVID and pushing people to home, the person looking over their shoulder is not there anymore.
Right, exactly. And let's face it, I mean, the SaaS industry isn't going anywhere.
No.
It's in 3 years, it'll be $186 billion industry.
But in 3 years, they'll have a new name for it.
Probably, or some kind of iteration on it.
Right. It'll be 2.0 at least.
A subset of something else. But yeah, so ultimately, I believe the MSP really needs to now take accountability for the end user behavior, and that involves now focusing on SaaS applications.
I concur. I agree. So when you think about that whole SaaS model, you think about applications. Obviously, we know that this doesn't mean that we're saying infrastructure is gone and that the traditional models that are the MSP is gone. I think it's this combination of remembering that we are MSPs first, and to constantly be looking at where infrastructure still matters versus where the application matters more. And I think that that's one of the challenges we face today, is that just because I have a great internet connection at my office to get to said Salesforce or whatever it is, doesn't mean that I have that same speed and performance when I leave. So it's like we're constantly having to juggle with how does infrastructure, whether it's the endpoint itself, get me to where I need to go to do my job, which is no longer defined by 4 walls and a parking space.
Right. Yeah. So I think, when we talk about, again, the transformation here, MSPs are really somewhat lucky in that they don't write any of the code. They're not producing any of the software products. So in many cases, it's easier for an MSP to essentially roll the punches and roll with what's going on in terms of transformation, because they can adopt those technologies, package them up, position them, and then deliver them to the customer. And I
Right.
think, many people haven't really recognized what a great job MSPs have done
R-
in transforming themselves.
For
I
sure.
remember, Chris, back in 2009, maybe it was, I was at an Enable conference in Phoenix, Scottsdale to be specific, and it was a great panel. They had an exec from Microsoft, they had an exec from Google, they had a couple other Advent. I think there was they had I couldn't believe they had maybe Amazon. I couldn't believe the people they got on this panel, and essentially all the panelists agreed that, look, if you're an MSP, what you need to do is you need to change your business model and essentially just consult and make sure you are putting people in the right position to gain access to the right cloud service. Half the audience literally got up and left. And I remember, Joe Panettiere was there. We talked, afterwards, and people I were asking, hey, do you see yourself selling? At the time it was like BPAWS.
Oh yeah.
And obviously turning to 365. And most people are like, no way, there were no way they're going to give up Exchange on-prem, because that was a gravy train for profitability. But ultimately, people did evolve. They recognized that the market was going to, evolve without them if they didn't jump on the bus. They did, and now we're in a situation where 92% of MSPs resell 365 to their customers.
So it's really funny what you said. So that panel conversation about, change your business, become a consultant. And I think MSPs would by and large say that at some level we provide consulting to our clients about what they should and shouldn't do. If I look at like this latest episode that actually goes live this week, and it was talking about if you've been providing the VCIO services to your clients, you're way ahead now that you're being forced to have conversations around security layering and actual policy building, because you've entrenched in the minds of those that you're working with that this conversation that we're going to have about how your warranties are up and we need to buy new gear is now about, I don't really care if your warranties are up. We're going to talk about your risk of having equipment out of warranty and let the client make these decisions. And I think MSPs for so long feel that they're providing quotes for a client to make decisions on, rather than providing educational insights for their clients to make decisions on. And that has been to our disadvantage for a long time. Now we're being pulled back in with a unique opportunity because the client doesn't know yet what they're asking for. The MSPs have a pretty good idea. And until the clients really understand some of these pieces, we're not going to be able to get to that. Here's a proposal for what you've asked for, because they don't know what to ask for right now.
Right. Yep.
I want to know when Johnny's downloading everything in his Exchange mailbox, right? Like, that's bad for me.
Absolutely.
Oh, it wasn't Johnny. It was Rajat in India or whoever it was. Like, I mean, yeah.
It's crazy since, moving over into this new role and seeing what these tools can produce in terms of, information, really insightful information about what's going on at the user level specific to SaaS applications. And look, I'm just coming off of, executive role at a pretty big company. Kaseya has 1,400 people, global. Yeah, I can tell you that, when I logged in every single day, it was to SaaS applications.
Right.
Not 99% of what I did was in 365, it was in Salesforce.
Sure.
And we also had a, HR application called Bamboo, all SaaS.
Right. So let's shift gears for a minute. So we don't need to get into specifically what your company does right now, but I'd like to talk about when you say SaaS applications and we talk about end users, because that's really ultimately what it's all about. In fact, MSP is no longer priced by device for the most part. It's like
exactly
user X, and we could probably sit in a room and somewhere we would all agree that we're all somewhere between like the $90 plus per seat, somewhere in the shy of $200. And there's everything in between, depending on what,
Right.
Everybody's a snowflake.
Yeah.
But one thing that isn't necessarily clear to everybody is, what am I looking for if I'm monitoring what my end users for my clients are actually doing on their computers? We spend tons of time in the SOC space, right? We spend tons of time talking about threat intelligence and all these things that are like the threat actors and data and malware and all these things. When you look at what end users are doing, what are, say, 3 or 5 top things that come to mind when you say, whatever you're using, you should be able to identify the users doing the following things? And I've got one. I'll start off. I believe geolocation is paramount to having a clue. Is it really my employee or is it somebody else? Because it may be a false positive, but it's a great place to start.
Right. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. You answered one of them already. So
all right.
Thanks. You're helping
now
me.
You got to get 5 more. So it'll be 6.
So I'll take that one a step further so I can get credit for one, which is also doing the cross correlation between applications, right? So let's just say you have a user that is using 365 and they're using Salesforce. And by the way, 44% of people that use 365 also use Salesforce.
Okay.
So just found that out the other day from Okta. So what I think a good solution will do, I'm going to hesitate from using my own company here in terms of what we do, but I think any good solution, what it's going to do is going to cross correlate the logins to those applications, because one of the big issues is that every SaaS application under the sun wants to use your 365 and your G Suite credentials to get into other applications.
Absolutely.
Right. So if Chris is logging in from Chicago to 365, right, and then minutes later is logging into Salesforce from Pasadena, California, that's an issue. That needs to be, alert needs to be raised, right, for the MSP to be able to intervene and find out what's going on there. So it's just it's more than just the geolocation.
It takes the false positive out, right? Because odds are I could log in from 2 different locations or have an anomaly that shows me in a place that I'm not if it's one login. But if I log into 2 different applications in the same span of time, there's no way that they're both going to show up from 2 different locations, or at least it'd be very highly improbable.
Bingo.
Okay.
Bingo.
Yeah. You got one.
So that's definitely one. Here's another big one. Orphan Links. So you've got OneDrive, you've got G Drive, you've got Dropbox. Sure. We're all sharing documents, all over the place, right? You and I could be working on a project, Chris, and we're sending data back and forth to each other via you pick it, OneDrive, G Drive, or Dropbox. 6 months later, the project's long over. Like we've forgotten about even what we did. Guess what? Those links out there are orphaned, and someone could leverage them to tunnel back into those applications and gain access. So that's another one that we find all the time, is that people, and they're just not thinking of it. Like I talked to an MSP, the owner and a president, and the president, who really runs the company, said, we don't use Dropbox. And the owner turned to him and said, yeah, I use Dropbox. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, I share financials with the controller through Dropbox. He was like, oh my goodness. And he turned to me and said, well, I guess we need your product.
Do you remember back in the day? I think this was from, it's a competitor to Zoom. I was just thinking of it.
Teams?
No, right. No, it was like they had the products Cubby and Join Me and Log Me In.
Yes.
So they had this product. I don't know if they still do. It's called App Guru, and you could run App Guru on like cloud environments or on like say a client's environment, and it would identify for you what was being used. And
Right.
primarily, it was focused on for file sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to run this on a very large company, about 6,500 employees with like 800 true office workers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They were hardcore G Suite enterprise. And to your point, like we use G Suite for everything. I went through, did the App Guru evaluation, and we discovered that 8% of all of their G Suite documents were created by 4 people. And that was 8% of the total document creation.
Mm-hmm.
The other 92% were spread out between OneDrive, Dropbox, Box, SugarSync. I could keep going. There were like 15 different file sharing applications that were being used that collectively added up to 90%, 92% of file storage. It's like, well, where are all your files? Like no one knows where these files are, right?
Right.
So not that that's one that we have to monitor, but like to your point, as sort of a this gets into that end user monitoring that may not be tied to what we can and can't monitor well, but it's like, have you had a conversation? This is the non-tech questionnaire, right? Hey, CEO or employee or whoever, I'm going to go through and ask everybody, like, what's your number one file sharing? What do you use to communicate with everybody around you?
Right.
If it's not the same one for everybody, you got a problem.
Right. Exactly. So imagine this for a second, Chris. Just imagine if you could go into a prospect with all of that information. You send them a link ahead of time before your meeting. You don't have their credentials. They're going to do it themselves. It's self-service.
Yep.
And then you get a full report on what other SaaS applications are doing, where the holes are, where the orphan links are, whether or not they've had any, folks with credentials logging in from non-whitelisted locations, blah,
anybody
blah, blah.
Chewing on those links.
Right. And you walk in to that prospect, into the sales meeting armed with that information and have an educated discussion about that. Don't you think that puts you in a much better position to win that deal? Because they probably already have an MSP. MSP is just not looking at it.
Well, do a 180. I think about all the clients that we already have and going, should I be able to sleep tonight or not? Like, I think I should. My endpoint protection is not showing any noise. You don't know what you don't know. I think what you're describing is the crux of managing the end user, which is what we're really getting at here.
Yeah. Now, look, the enterprise, they've recognized this problem for a while, and there are solutions out there. Matter of fact, Gartner has a category. It's called CASB,
right?
Cloud Access Security Broker, right?
Yep.
And if you look at the Magic Quadrant, there's some good companies in there with good products. You've got BitGlass, you've got McAfee's got Envision, Microsoft, Netscope. The problem is they're all single tenant, somewhat complicated, actually pretty complicated, and expensive applications meant for the enterprise, not meant for MSPs, and certainly not meant for the small business customer.
So we've got 2. Can we get a third and get to 5, or do we really think there's just 3 that we really need to be worried about?
Let's keep going, man.
Okay. Well, let's go for number 3.
Okay. Adding a device. So a user is adding a device to access an application they have credentials to.
Right. And it could be BYOD or it could be a company device, but either way, it's a net new asset with a tie back to whatever application.
Right. Wouldn't you want, as the MSP, to know whether or not the end users you're accountable for are adding devices to applications?
Well, now you're getting into what we talk about in the CIS top 20, which is assets that are authorized versus unauthorized. And because of applications you can only do so much with certain apps, right? Like they may not have geolocation or some of these other things, but to see suddenly another device reaching out into those applications, I think that's a huge deal because it also adds that second layer of accountability that I have as the MSP because my RMM doesn't show that device yet. How long before it does? Today, tomorrow, 2 weeks? Just depends, right? Like it doesn't get joined to the domain or it doesn't get put on the right network. It may never show up.
Mm-hmm.
but I'm
Exactly.
responsible for it because they're going to call me up and say, "Hey, I'm having this issue. I'm having to reset my password for 365," and it's like, that's weird. Why?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let's keep going.
Yep.
Multi-authentication failures.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this leads to brute force attacks.
Sure.
Most people have no idea when a brute force attack is happening. One of the things that we find all the time when we run the scan is you've got a lot of accounts out there that are orphaned. People left the organization, been terminated, whatever. They're actually their accounts still exist. And that is fertile ground for bad actors that want to essentially leverage those accounts to try to get in. Right.
Right.
So you can see this happening, literally,
Right.
like all these failures coming in, trying to get in. Eventually they will get in if they have enough attempts. So that is, being able to understand that and then essentially cut them off at the pass is pretty important.
Well, I think along those lines, because even if the account has been suspended, we're talking about SaaS applications, which means that if it's attacking an account that's suspended or disabled, whatever you want to call it, that means they know the account exists, which means
Yeah.
how long before they figure out another account that isn't suspended or disabled?
Right. Exactly. I think I got one more left, right?
You got one more left.
Let's go. I mean, there's a few here that I could go with. So I'm gonna go pick the best one out of the group. Security policy change.
Okay.
So you got a user that has changed the security policy for themselves within the application.
So essentially, not that it isn't a big deal anyways, but in this particular case, we're talking about they now have privileged access, or they're
Yes.
promoting themselves to have more privileges than they did.
Yes.
That's a huge one. We talk about this one all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm going to say I'm not sure that we got 5. You need one more.
Okay. So there's a lot of okay, here's one. You've got a user that has just downloaded a terabyte of data from Salesforce.
So ultimately, the goal that we have as MSPs is all of the things that we've talked about are all forefront on everyone's mind right now. And none of us are necessarily going, I need more information on SaaS. It's really that I need more information on my end users. And you talked about a lot of the enterprise products that are out there. One that comes to mind for me is Netrix, which lets you, you run it on a domain controller, which gets kind of complicated because now you got to run it all on my own server. So it's not multi-tenant, right? So, but again, that product really is focused on like 2 of those 5 or 6 that we came up with. You know, did I download stuff? Did I have security privileges change? And I don't believe for 2 seconds that this is really less than the enterprise and the small business. Like that we have to have. I think that you have the problem just as significant in the enterprise space, because unless you're Fortune 500 and larger, I think you're going to see that those enterprises are still saying, where's my spend going? And no, I'm not spending it on, say, whichever one of the many that you listed, Casby or whatever it might be, right? Because a lot of the businesses that we're seeing, especially with the change in workforce, they're no longer allocating more resources like they did before. Because like, if I can see you and we can all work together, it makes sense to add one more resource because they're siloed, they're good at what they do. You distribute the workforce, and now we all go, well, how do I cut Johnny out? He hasn't been on Zoom in the last 4 meetings. Like, do we need Johnny?
Right.
Why I picked Johnny, but sure beat Jim, right? Like I could use Jim.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jim, this has been a great conversation. I have to say that this might have been one of the most actionable as far as like educating our MSPs on thinking through what are you focused on when you put together a proposal or you're reevaluating the clients that you're working with. Like, where should I focus my energy to get the most emotional response?
Yeah.
That's less about signing on a quote, but maybe more of signing on a change in lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you have an opportunity as MSP now to evolve your business, to be a hero to your customers by giving them access to this information
Sure.
right? To be able to let them know when this stuff is going on, to be able to let them know that, look, their employee just downloaded a terabyte of data from 365, OneDrive, Salesforce, whatever. We listed 6, Chris,
Yep.
of these different alerts, but we actually alert on 63 over the applications that we currently cover.
So before I let you go, where
Yeah.
can the community that's listening to this, where can they find you? Because obviously we've talked about some things that is definitely a key focus witin your company, SaaS Alerts.
Yeah. So you can go to saasalerts.com. You can learn about us there. You can email me at jim@saasalerts.com. Chris, I'm a huge advocate of the MSP community, and ultimately we want to be the most MSP friendly software company in the ecosystem. And that's our focus. We want MSPs to use the product. By the way, people that are MSPs that use a product for their customers, they use it for themselves for free. That's
awesome.
one of the founding principles that we have at SaaS Alerts is you need to protect your own house before you're protecting others.
Awesome. Well, Jim, I appreciate you on. And for those of you listening, have a great rest of your week.
Great. Thank you, Chris.